Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Today we have our normal group of Deena, Bosworth, Madeline, Fata, Samantha, Gibson. Kind of a follow-up to our conference. We haven't done a podcast since our conference, which has been a few weeks, but there is some activity to report on as we get closer and closer to our pseudo budget deadline. It being an election year, there's some things that are happening here later May, early June that we want to talk about. So Deena, why don't you kick us off a little bit? Give us an update on, we've got budgets being passed out. Let's talk specifically general budgets. We got the House has a plan for general budget revenue sharing for counties. The Senate has county revenue sharing in their general government budget. The governor has her recommendation. However, none of them match. So how about a quick update on where each of them are at right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. So just sort of a general overview for everyone listening. We are right in the thick of budget season. How it starts is the governor makes her recommendation for what she wants the next fiscal year budget to look like. And she did that in February. And the governor did a recommendation for revenue sharing for cities, villages, townships, and counties that was pretty much the same as prior years. She wants to give a 5% increase for basic county revenue sharing and then some one-time monies. She's got 3% additional for your revenue sharing if you have allocated all of your ARPA funds. And then another 2% for public safety. Now, this is typical. There's really no major changes in boilerplate language in her recommendation, and just kind of status quo from what we've seen for the past several decades. And we're just going to give her a percentage increase. The House, on the other hand, the House and the Senate are now have the budgets in front of them. They've been working on them. The House subcommittee and the Senate subcommittee came out with their recommendations for revenue sharing, and they're similar yet different again. So the House has recommended what we had in our revenue sharing trust fund bill language, which is to carve out 8% of the first 4% of the state sales tax and put that into a revenue sharing pot that would then get distributed out to cities, villages, townships, and counties in the same proportion and the same manner that it's been done in years past. But it's tied to the sales tax, which is really good for us because then that is tracking with the growth of the state's revenue and not just an arbitrary percentage recommendation increase. The House also decided to do the Public Safety Trust Fund, which we've talked about on this podcast before. And that allocates 1.5% of the first 4% of the state sales tax and dedicates it to high crime areas across the state. And that money would have to go to violence prevention, law enforcement activities, some community activities that might help in aiding in the reduction of violent crime. The caveat with that, though, is that $110 million will go out primarily to cities, some townships, really not to any counties, unless the county has a contract with the police department or they decide to send it over to us. And that money cannot supplant your current allocation to your sheriff's department or to those violent prevention funds. You have to spend that money in addition to what you've previously been spending. So that's kind of that whole revenue sharing recommendation on the House side in a nutshell. The Senate, on the other hand, also adopted that idea of carving out a percentage of the sales tax, but they said we want to do 9.1% of the state sales tax for cities, villages, townships, and counties. And they said we're not doing the public safety percentage. They're not tying public safety to sales tax. They did, however, allocate $15 million for public safety endeavors in their budget. But that 9.1% of the sales tax and the Senate plan changes a little bit of the distribution for cities, villages, townships, and counties. And I'm just going to talk counties because that's what we were primarily here to talk about. So Senator Cherry made the recommendation that we are going to take a bigger piece of the sales tax, which is about 5.2 or $52.5 million increase. He says, whatever your county got in fiscal year 24 is absolutely the minimum. And then that additional $52.5 million that he is recommending the increase for this year is going to get distributed out to counties based on an inverse relationship to their taxable value. So basically going kind of righting the ship from where we were for decades when we did the reserve fund, the property tax reserve fund, and paid ourselves our revenue sharing. So what that really means is I think the smallest increase is 6.6%, but we're talking average of about 20% increase for every county across the state. Some obviously higher, some lower. But it's still setting that baseline, tying it to the increase in the sales tax, and then distributing it out. So here we are, we've got 3 different proposals. And we don't know exactly where they're going to end up. We do know that this coming Friday, we will have a consensus revenue estimating conference on Friday the 17th, and we'll really know how much money we have to deal with at that time. After that happens, after that CREC, we call it, after that conference revenue estimating conference happens, members of the legislature will get targets for their budgets. They'll know how much money they have to work with, and then they'll really start negotiating with the opposite chamber on where they're going to land on all these different items. And then they have to get in the room and negotiate with the governor's office. So it's still all pretty much up in the air. But I will say this, great news that both the House and the Senate are adopting this percentage of the sales tax for our revenue sharing.
Yeah, that is. And so in order of complexity, the simplest is the governor's flat dollars distributed the same way that it is now, just a flat increase. House has got percentage of sales tax. So the pie, for lack of a better term, the pie that the dollars go into is changing. The distribution doesn't.
Right.
Based on the percentage of you get of revenue sharing now. And then the Senate, and then the public safety component as well in the House. And then the Senate, revenue sharing, trust fund established, percentage of sales tax, similar concept to the House, not dollar figures wise, but so similar concept. And then distribution changes as well to that inverse wealth factor, I guess, county wealth factor based on your property taxes, population, that sort of thing. So yeah, a lot of different moving parts there. Very interesting. A lot of work to do between now and, July 1st when they like to, well, technically the law says they have to have the budget done, but of course there's nothing that's happens if they don't. But it being election year, we do kind of expect that to happen in the next few weeks. So great update there, Deena. Thank you. I think we have some of this information on our website as well. If you need to look at some pictures or graphs or things like that, we've got from our conference, all our conference resources are up on our website. You can get the information there. So moving along, Sam, there's some legislation you want to talk about that has to do with prisoner productivity credit. Why don't you give us an update on what this bill is? This is kind of a new bill we haven't spoken about before, and where are we at with it?
Thank you, Steve. So last week, a bipartisan package was introduced in the Senate relating to prisoner productivity credits, and it would allow certain prisoners to earn these credits to reduce their sentence. Now, this would apply to even, less than a minimum sentence if you were to earn enough productivity credits. So with that and our support for truth in sentencing policies, we view this as conflicting to truth in sentencing. So MAC, alongside the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan and the Michigan Attorney General, were all opposed to these bills. They've been introduced and referred to committee. So we'll see, what timeline they have and how quickly they move. But at this time, we are opposed.
What does a prisoner productivity credit look like?
That's a great question. It varies. A lot of things that prisoners are already doing and things that MDOC offers, whether it's a class, different programming that you can enroll in within MDOC. They just don't apply right now the way they would under this legislation.
So these are things that you do while incarcerated that basically currently don't take any time off your sentence, but if this law were to pass, would knock off time? Is that kind of how it would work?
Yeah, so, and again, it's only certain prisoners based on the offense, right? The reason that you're incarcerated. And then ultimately, parole board makes a recommendation to the judge and prosecutor, and the judge and prosecutor would have the final discretion as to whether or not you would be released based on the productivity credits you earned. So there is, a series of events that has to play out in order for the credits to apply and actually to be released before your minimum sentencing. But even that being at play directly contradicts truth in sentencing and, a victim's understanding of, hey, my perpetrator was sentenced to 5 to 10, they're going to be out in 3.5. So I should say too, it requires the prosecutor to inform a victim that that the prisoner would be eligible for early release, depending on the parole board, judge, etc.
Okay, and then has a committee date been set for these bills yet, or they've just been introduced?
They've just been introduced. I have not seen a committee date set yet, but I imagine that would be sooner than later. It's in Senate Judiciary.
Oh, so they're just Senate bills on this, no House bills at this point?
Correct. House bills, a package was introduced last year.
Okay.
House bills, and they've not moved. And I think the holdup in the House is the uncertainty of this. The Senate disagrees in that these counteract truth in sentencing, whereas the House has kind of held them up because if they do, contradict truth in sentencing, that was a ballot initiative. That's our Constitution. I don't think the House wants to take that up and move them too quickly, but the Senate is more eager to do so. And it's bipartisan in the Senate. It's all Democratic in the House.
Okay. Interesting. Thanks for that update. Madeline, some legislation that we wanted to talk about with regards to the Voting Rights Act. What's the update on that?
Yes, so there are 4 Senate bills that are before the Senate Elections Committee currently. And the goal of these bills is to codify the Federal Voting Rights Act. But Michigan is very unique in that we have a decentralized voting system and local clerks are largely responsible for conducting elections. So while the concept of codifying the Federal Voting Rights Act seems great in theory, the way this bill is actually written, there's a lot of burden put on our local clerks for a lot of things that happen to be out of their control. So what it really says is that local governments shall not impair a protected class from voting or participating in the political process. And an impairment might be the location of a drop box, or the location of a polling center, or the way in which a district is drawn. So this is concerning for a lot of reasons, particularly the way in which these bills interact with Proposal 2 of 2022, which extended voting to 9 days of early voting. So a lot of our county clerks are struggling to find polling locations willing to host an election for that length of time. So they're limited in their options. God forbid their only option is in an undesirable location. If someone felt impaired by that location, they could then file a complaint with the local unit of government. The local unit would then have to seek legal counsel to fight those accusations. There is an off-ramp process where you can negotiate before it escalates to court, but it's still going to cost people time and money. These bills have had 2 hearings so far. The first one was largely from voting advocacy rights groups supporting the legislation. And then the second hearing was most of the local groups voicing concerns with the bills. So we did submit some written testimony in that second hearing. We took a no position with concerns at the time because we are actively working with bill sponsors to address these concerns and try and rework some of this language. So I have a meeting actually later today, 2-hour work group with the other locals and the bill sponsors, and we're going to really try to hash out some of these details. So stay tuned for hopefully some changes in the near future.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we, this past election we just had earlier this year, wasn't that the first one, not the special one about a week or so ago, but the other one, wasn't that the first one under the new voting rules, election rules too?
Yep. Yeah. So our clerks are overwhelmed by all of the new regulations that they're having to follow, having to place something like this on them now. It
You
would
know,
be
how do you
ridiculous.
adapt to what's already changed, right?
Yes.
You live and learn, right? So they've already had this one. They know now what they have to change, and now to add some pile on with some new rules and regulations would be, yeah, I can imagine the clerks are very concerned about that. So we've had 2 committee hearings. Do we anticipate any movement anytime soon, or where are we at right now?
I have been told by the committee chair that there will be hearings throughout the month of May. I
Okay.
haven't seen a posting for this week yet, but I do not expect them being voted out in the very near future.
Especially with budget stuff going on
Mhm.
here in the room. All right, great. Thanks, Madeline. Sam, one quick update. Trial court funding, we've talked about it for a few times now. Sunset bill has extended. We're good there. Funding is restored for now until 2026. Is that right? Or 2020? Yeah, 2026. But there was another bill, accompaniment bill that didn't get passed. What's the update on that bill?
So House Bill 5534, which is the data collection piece, requires the state court administrator's office to put together a report based on court costs, revenue, maintenance of effort, etc. Turn that over to legislators in May of 26. That was concurred in by the House last week, so that awaits the governor's signature. And as we've discussed, that the sunset bill and that scale piece were tie barred, which really held it up, and it was a political issue for quite some time. We avoided all of that, and the sunset was extended to December of 2026, so about 2.5 years.
And that new that bill that just was concurred in, just a refresher real quick, what does that bill do?
It would require the state court administrator's office to collect data from all local courts on their costs, their revenue, their maintenance of effort, quite a few other things, and then compile a report and give it to legislators in May of 2026. And then the intent is for legislators to use that report to implement the trial court funding commission recommendations. They need those dollar amounts to determine, what needs to go in the state court fund. There's other recommendations about transitioning judges to being full state employees. So with that data and court costs, legislators can make informed policy decisions around court funding in the future. We'll see if they actually get this done before December of 2026. It's an election year, so, they might not be too keen on transforming our court funding system in that, 6-ish months in 2026. But for now, the fee authority remains for another 2.5 years.
Yeah, so no direct or immediate impact to any court operations.
Nope,
Just-
none whatsoever.
Just collecting data at this point.
Status quo.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, anything else that I might have missed from anyone or want to add on? All right. Well, we do have our policy summit coming up on June 25th here in Lansing. Registration is not quite open yet, but we do anticipate that open in the next couple weeks. So keep your eyes open for that in our legislative update. Hope to see folks there. We've got a great lineup that we'll make you aware of once that's available. So thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you in a week.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.